Face front, non-believers. A couple of months ago, I had the privilege of catching the preview screening of A Year Without God, the highly anticipated documentary about a pastor who gave up God for a year in 2014. It's been a long journey for the filmmakers, whose Indiegogo campaign for post-production was successfully funded 2 years ago, last month. Let me just say the obvious up front. This is a review for a documentary that is a work in progress. I'm going to re-emphasize that a few more times throughout this review, I'm sure. So the purpose of this review is not to place an assessment on the film because technically the film qua film doesn't exist. The function of this review is to discuss where the filmmakers could go from here, where I think they should go from here, and hopefully to give some insight to any of you would-be filmmakers. Also, full disclosure, I personally know Ryan Bell, some of the filmmakers, and a lot of people featured in the documentary. Before I dive in and start getting detailed about what I think is wrong with the film in progress, you should know it's actually pretty decent to good, and with a little tweaking can easily become great. This could potentially be a powerful call to arms or even answer for so many people who are struggling with doubt or a loss of faith. And I can't think of a better person to be the poster child of such a journey. I honestly don't know Ryan Bell as well as I'd like to, but I've seen his warmth and sincerity win over some of the harshest skeptics I know. I also admire his motivation for outreach, his humanism, and his feminism. But don't worry, this documentary won't ever mention it. First, let me go over some of my more arbitrary notes. That is, issues that if the filmmakers chose to completely ignore and leave as is, most of the general viewing public might not give a shit about unless they literally work in production. This one might just be me, but I swear I've seen the whole preparing to be on camera beginning of a documentary like a dozen times in my life. You know, like they actually have a second camera that is filming the camera that's getting ready to film someone who is still attaching their lapel mic, getting makeup done, going over what they're going to say. Someone is getting a reading off the light meter. There's some close-up shots of the actual film equipment. Of course, a clapboard and a lot of shallow depth of field. Bokeh. I get it. It effectively tells the audience we're crossing that narrative line into nonfiction, just like Once Upon a Time lets the audience know that what follows is a story. But just like Once Upon a Time, it's so broad and cliche. How does it help tell this specific documentary story? Not a deal breaker, obviously, just weak first-time filmmaker stuff. As I already said, this is a preview version, a work in progress, so I don't need to mention anything about the film's want for sound mixing and color correction. They're well aware of all that. So when it comes to the actual quality of the footage, my note isn't so much for the filmmakers because the die is cast, but more of a rant for any potential filmmakers. For those of you who don't remember, let me tell you about the mid to late aughts. The filmmaking world was introduced to the Canon 5D, and soon a plethora of other still photography DSLRs that could shoot video. Finally, poor amateurs could get that film look for the price of a consumer video camera. Before we realized we had to get a separate mic with audio recorder or preamp, a cage, a shoulder mount. Why did we think this was a good solution? Anyways, we also had to buy separate lenses. And boy, there are some beautiful lenses in the world. Beautiful and fast lenses. Finally, we didn't need a $5,000 Arri kit to light a scene. Hell, maybe if we bought a really nice lens, we won't need any light kit. Ever since the early days of DSLR filmmaking, DPs, directors of photography, not the sexy, kinky kind of DP, you know what I'm talking about. You filthy slut. As I was saying, a few years ago, a lot of DPs were quite smitten with their Canon 5Ds and fast lenses and dynamic range-enhancing colored profiles, and a lot of them had so much love and faith in their beautiful, full-censored cameras that they gave up on or never even bothered to learn lighting. Now, before I turn this into a whole other video, let me just sum up this lesson by telling you what every skilled videographer will tell you. Fuck your camera. Fuck your lenses. Good lighting. give me good lighting, and I almost don't give a shit what camera you hand me. Back to the review. This over-reliance on cameras is kind of what happens in a lot of A Year Without God. Now, it's a documentary, so I can totally understand that documentary filmmakers are a victim of circumstance, and there are gonna be a lot of moments when good lighting isn't an option. And there are moments where that was definitely the case. But there's a lot of moments where that couldn't have been the case. I mean, a lot of the off-the-cuff bad lighting moments happen in Ryan's house or apartment, so it's not like they didn't have access to their main subject's living space to throw up a couple LEDs or softboxes.
But hey man, I have a full censored camera and a super fast lens. I can get enough detail in camera now, boost the shit out of the mids and posts, lose any natural color that might have been there, and artificially add that saturation back in. No one will know the difference.
We'll see. Even in some of the actual staged interviews, the lighting seems a bit dim. Or shit. Whoever lit Michael Shermer, you're a dick. I mean, if I was your subject, you'd just be bad at your job. But you're a dick. If you'd like to see Mr. Shermer in a more aesthetically pleasing light, stop by Skeptic Magazine's YouTube channel and check out their latest Salon Lecture Series. Beautiful filming and editing by me and my team. Of course, we do have the benefit of natural lighting in a gorgeous home, but seriously, check it out. It's fucking awesome. And while I'm at it, let me add this to my checklist of optical privilege. A combination of my obsession with lighting and my newfound partnership with scientist turned filmmaker Randy Olson has led to an embarrassment of lighting riches. Hashtag light privilege. And if you insist on seeing me light Shermer under controlled conditions, just go to skeptic.com and check out some of our latest videos. Now, I hope I'm wrong about most of the interviews. I hope that most were shot with a nice 4K camera, and the footage just happens to look flat and shitty because that's how 4K footage looks, until you give it a little LUT love like this. We shall see. But in fairness, even at HD, there is technically enough detail there. A talented colorist will be able to make it sing. She might hate you for the rest of her life, but it can be done. So good luck. My last arbitrary note is about some of the production's self-love. Again, a bit arbitrary, but noticeable, even if you're not in the industry. First, and I'm sure this may have been more of a limitation of the material on hand, but at one point there was a full-screen Ardent Atheist podcast logo. The podcast belonging to the producer of this film, Emery, a logo covering the whole screen. Like, while people are saying interesting things. Granted, they were saying those interesting things on Ardent Atheists, but still. Again, I'm sure this was a matter of the editors not wanting to go fishing for the original footage, and so they just used whatever was on the original live stream podcast feed. That often cuts back to a logo of the show, I think. And I'm confident they have every intention to replace it with original footage or B-roll. I'm positive. However, after the full screen logo disappears, we do get a regular title card for Emery's podcast that never leaves. Everyone else in the film has a title that comes in, 2, 3, 4, and goes out. But not that one. Lastly, at least as far as I noticed, we literally have our main subject, Ryan Bell, giving accolades on camera to the producer, Emery, by saying, "I'm blown away by the people Emery has lined up for me to talk to." And hey, Emery did line up a lot of amazing fucking people for Ryan to talk to. Hell, Emery hooked me up with Laurie Kilmartin a while back. I mean, hooked one of my productions up with the talents of Laurie Kilmartin. And if I was Ryan, I'd still be on my knees showing that beautiful Hobbit filmmaker just how grateful I am. But is it really a part of the narrative? I mean, I guess technically it is, insofar as every documentary crew is intrinsically a part of the documentary itself, but wouldn't it be a little more compelling and connected to the actual story you're trying to tell if you came at it from, I don't know, I'm blown away by the people who want to talk to me about my year without God. Not, hey, we have an awesome production team who got a lot of names to be a part of this documentary. I mean, that sort of thing should be a given because, that's their job. So what Ryan is essentially saying to camera is, I'm blown away that Emery did his job. But I guess you'd have to ask Ryan if it really was that remarkable that Emery actually did his job. And here's the deal. If a producer is good at their job, the accolades will come. Or more specifically, if any accolades are to come to a film, a good producer is the first and biggest benefactor of those accolades. You don't have to add them into the production itself.
Do you believe going back to a normal life would awaken the monster that lives inside your belly button?
I think demon will stay asleep as long as I just avoid all the people I love. But hey, I just gotta say, before we continue, Werner, your line of questioning, amazing.
Thank you.
Seriously, it's non-judgmental, yet invasive, and somehow austere.
Well, thank you.
Really, really great job, man.
And I thought about this. I honestly did. I thought, okay, maybe it's just me. Because I know Emery, and am aware of his desire to build an empire. I would never fallaciously put that word in another grown-up's mouth. So I assumed I was just being biased because I'm familiar with Emery and the nightmares of grandeur that haunt him. But there I am at lunch after the screening, and my date, unsolicited, is like, "Hey John, did you know that movie was produced by Emery of the Art and Atheist podcast found on EmeryEmery.com, Emery? Were you aware of that, John?" So it wasn't just me. That's embarrassing. So maybe pull back on that a bit. It's a little gauche. Then again, me and my guest are in our 30s, and I'm sure a younger, hipper audience wouldn't even notice or even be aware that they should notice. I mean, did you know that kids these days aren't even familiar with the concept of selling out?
I don't hear young people talking about selling out. I'm not sure they even know what it means.
Selling out. Can you define that?
Well, selling out means, like, it could mean different things.
I guess, I don't know, I think first of like a concert that's like totally sold out, like no tickets left. That's probably not what you meant though.
I don't really know what that means.
So maybe we're facing an era where producers or production companies inserting self-eulogizing blowjobs into their own films is just standard operating procedure. Something as ubiquitous and essential as color correction or bidding for active sponsorships. If you're in the middle of a meta-comedy bit and you need some sweet caffeinated refreshment without the calories, reach for a Diet Dr. Pepper. It's the DP you only need one hole for. Okay, now for the big stuff. The biggest of which is just how in this documentary currently is. Meaning, it makes the classic mistake that a lot of not only documentaries, but films, books, and writing of all kinds make, which is it assumes too much of the audience. No, hold up, stop typing, just pause. Let me finish. There's nothing wrong with assuming too much intelligence of your audience. You can actually get away with that even if your audience is actually stupid. Where so many creators fail on their fucking face and then choose to blame their audience's alleged lack of intelligence is when they assume that their audience will care. You know what? Let me have an actual documentary filmmaker explain it to you.
I made a movie called Flock of Dodos. It was about the controversy over the teaching of evolution versus intelligent design. We interviewed a bunch of creationists and scientists, and then I had a team of editors who began to put the footage together. And in the beginning, we assembled it as a series of segments. So we had a segment on evolution, a segment on creationism, a segment on intelligent design, one on school boards, one on Charles Darwin, on and on. And as we watched the movie week after week, my editors began to find it so painfully boring. It wasn't boring for me. I was interested in the material, and furthermore, this was my life's project. I had everything at stake with it. But to them, it just was boring. And we began to build more and more tension until finally, in the 6th week, we ended up in a giant meltdown fight in the editing suite. I ended up throwing everybody out, locking the door, locking myself in for the next 3 days, as I worked round the clock and slept on the couch and ordered in pizza and Chinese food. trying to figure out what was wrong with this movie until it finally dawned on me, what if I built all the information around a single problem, the question of who was behind this intelligent design movement? As soon as I set it up that way and began to build this structure, all the other information focused on that central problem, it began to make sense and be much more interesting. And that's what is meant by narrative structure. When I brought it back to the editors, they loved it. They took it the final distance. We ended up premiering it at a major film festival, and it aired on Showtime for a couple of years.
Now, this is honestly the last thing I assumed could be wrong with this documentary. I mean, the story is engaging. I don't know anyone who caught wind of Ryan Bell's story without a what? And then you learn the details, and it becomes heartwarming, and even heartbreaking. But what do we get? Well, in its current state, we get an intro so generic it can basically be swapped out with the first 10 minutes of any made-for-TV biopic, a conflict that gets resolved 15 minutes into the movie, yup, that happens, and then an hour of talking heads. Don't get me wrong, I was loving the first hour of talking heads until I realized, oh God, these interviews have only been going on for 30 minutes and I'm out of espresso, shit. My date was also shifting around looking for more caffeine. I mean, did we come here to watch a year of talking about living without God? And for the record, she works in a STEM field and I produce 20-minute long videos explaining why people are wrong about philosophy, so we can handle our fair share of tedious. Now, some of this tediousness can easily be solved with some very basic scene switches. Let's start with the intro. There's a moment several minutes in where Ryan is addressing his church and says something like,
as most of you probably know, judging by this remarkable attendance at church, this is my last Sabbath here at Hollywood.
That is your opening. How did you miss that? Otherwise, it's 5 to 10 minutes of a vague documentary about a beloved pastor. There's setting up a reveal, and then there's burying the lead. If I'm just coming across this documentary cold turkey, I'm thinking it's about some dead pastor who did a lot of community service or some living pastor who is about to ask for my donation. No offense to all my pastor's subscribers, but I'd rather sit through actual church than watch that documentary. Or Sunday Assembly, hey-o! So if I wasn't being clear enough for the filmmakers, your current opening, much like your entire documentary, assumes way too much inside atheist fanboy background from your audience. If I don't know who Ryan Bell is, then I don't give a shit about this pastor that everyone is talking about with near posthumous reverence. If you open it with this...
this is my last Sabbath here at Hollywood.
Oh, snap! It doesn't matter if I've never heard of Ryan, you've got my attention. Shortly after they finally establish what it is we're actually watching, they build to an emotional climax and resolve it moments later. Seriously, this would make a fantastic 20-minute documentary, but since you insist on an adult-sized biopic, let's push that emotional climax towards the end, shall we? To get specific, I'm talking about a scene like 15 minutes in where Ryan is talking about his connection with a great big world song, Say Something, and how hauntingly it voiced his feelings about his relationship with God, and how he finally came to terms with losing God. Less than 20 minutes in, and our main character in a movie about spending an entire year without God has already come to grips with losing God. How? How do you cut the film this way? Okay. Let me spell it out for the filmmakers. A pastor giving up God is the lead you don't want to bury, so put it up front. Him resolving that self-explanatory conflict is the reveal that you set up for. It's the climax. That is your emotional money shot. That is your narrative skeet, motherfucker! And maybe the filmmakers were thinking what I'm sure some of you might be thinking, which is, well, if that sort of revelation happened towards the beginning of the year, then it should be towards the beginning of the film because we're pedantic and scientifically minded people. Well, first of all, this is why science can't have nice things. Secondly, fuck consistency. Tell me a good story. You don't have to be consistent and boring to be truthful. The timeline of the documentary doesn't have to follow the timeline of Ryan's year, especially if the biggest narrative climax happened a couple months in. I mean, I wouldn't want to keep watching A Doll's House to see Nora get a studio apartment and qualify for an entry-level position. Unless I wasn't totally sure that she had made up her mind about leaving her family because the editor left out that final scene. And we see her continuing single lady in the city struggles mount, and just when we're sure that she's living a brand new lie, we get a climactic flashback to that last conversation between her and Helmer. So when it cuts back to present day Nora, we see the resolve in her eyes, and the movie ends. Otherwise, we're just watching Ryan deal with the mundane human problem of, well, what do I do now? Except instead of a therapist, he's hitting up some of the greatest minds of our time. Remind me the next time Dawkins is in town. I've been worried that I'm focusing too much on work lately, but I'm not sure if I'm ready to get back on the dating scene just yet. That's what happens when you put your climax at the beginning. It makes the rest of the film anticlimactic. Oh, also, when you do the climax, which is beautifully done, by the way, with the Say Something song playing and all those shots of Ryan praying in church and looking pensive, please cut out almost any and all of Ryan's voiceover where he actually explains how the song captures his relationship with God. I mean, the song is literally saying the words, "Say something, I'm giving up on you. I'm sorry that I couldn't get to you. Anywhere I would have followed you. Say something, I'm giving up on you." I trust I don't have to explain the Kuleshov effect to the filmmakers, or to ask them not to treat their audience like morons. See, this is what I mean. So many filmmakers assume their audience have enough knowledge to care, but not enough intelligence to understand a frying pan over the head moment like that one. See, now I'm doing something similar, which is beating a dead horse, so apologies and moving on. The biggest problem with the entire film is actually the simplest to fix, which is often the case. Like some self-help ass clown once said, you never really trip over a tree, it's the little things. So this is a problem that I'm nearly positive that the filmmakers are aware of and have probably been slowly fixing since day one. And the problem is the same one that many documentaries suffer from: too many talking heads. I mentioned this earlier, and yes, some simple scene switching can definitely alleviate the total fatigue that this film suffers from, but at the end of the day, you're gonna have to gut this mother and replace some of those guts with stuffing. I know that is not something intelligent folks want to hear. The idea of cutting smart people saying smart things from a smart documentary and replacing it with fluff sounds awful. It probably sounds like betraying some sort of principle. I don't know. For me, it comes down to this. Do you want to create something that has a clear story and/or message? Or do you want to stuff your project with a lot of intellectual anecdotes that smart audience members will pat you on the back for and tell you that you made a smart and interesting film as they walk away to never, ever watch it again? This is not about being smart versus dumbing down. There are so many bullshit conspiracy documentaries, for example, that fall on deaf ears because they cram them full of what they think are intellectual anecdotes and refuse to develop a clear story. It just so happens that smart people seem to be the biggest perpetrators of this folly. Just ask James Carville about the last Clinton campaign. Actually, no, don't ask him about that. Don't. It won't be pretty. So who stays and who gets cut? Well, a lot of that sort of thing is, of course, always left up to taste, but there are a few obvious answers on both sides. An obvious keeper is, of course, Bob Odenkirk. Sadly, you don't want to lose any celebrities, and don't let any smart people talk you out of them because you'll need those names to get decent distribution. Even though names don't mean shit anymore, but distributors and media outlets aren't quite ready to give up that ghost just yet, so we need to trick them while we still can. First on the chopping block are, sadly, some of my own personal friends, and I don't feel like suggesting that any of my friends get cut, so I won't. You know who I'm not going to feel bad about hypothetically cutting? Sassy Magoo. What's the point in having a documentary interview with a man whose claim to fame is being a university professor who pretends to be an angry teenage blogger? In real life, he's extremely boring and utterly devoid of any actual content. It's not that he won't be missed when you cut him, it's that no one will remember him ever being there. All right, how about keeping a couple people I know and love, like Brian Dalton, who is not only a quasi kind of celebrity, but he also helps forward the narrative because he had Ryan on Mr. Deity, which was an awesome part of Ryan's year without God. Telling you, this documentary practically writes itself. Oh, side note, Brian, why are you always wearing shorts on film? You know you're going to be on camera. We never trick you at the last minute. And despite the fashion faux pas, a grown man in shorts, I know you hate it when your knees end up on camera. Well, guess what, buddy? When this film gets released in 2023, your knees are showing, bitch. Our next keeper, as though there was any doubt, is my old roomie, Eugenie Scott. Not only is she an amazing and influential intellectual who is always well-spoken, but she really had an impact on Ryan this year. Like, he has personally told me how important Eugenie was to him finding a path post-God. And boy, can I see that. Eugenie Scott is one of the most disarming people I've ever met. If she asks for your name, you're gonna double-check before you answer her. But simultaneously, she's also a huge sweetheart. She actually let me stay at her house the first time I went to Skeptical. Speaking of unsearchable names, did I mention this film was screened at Logical? Isn't hiding our events from Muggles fun? As my friend Wendy Hughes likes to say, to make a long story forever, let's wrap this up. I realize I've given a lot of notes and you might walk away thinking that I didn't like this film. Let me reiterate, I did like it. It's good and it has the potential to be great. It's just the nature of notes that there's not a whole lot to say about stuff that works and almost never enough to say about what doesn't work. I have every confidence that the people who finally produce this rough cut can take it the full distance. No one is sure when that will be achieved, especially Ryan, so stop asking him. If you ever have any questions about the release of a film, don't ask the people in front of the camera. And if I could give just one last bit of advice to any would-be filmmakers in the world, it would be this. Be careful who you decide to work with. One of my good friends, who has been in the industry longer than most of my viewers have been alive, I'm sure, has a sort of litmus test. If the only praise you ever hear about a person is from that person, as opposed to any of the countless people they've claimed to work with, you might want to be skeptical and do some more vetting. You could end up with an actor who studied Meisner and ends up physically hurting his co-stars. You could end up with an editor who wants to color correct your 4K footage on their laptop. A sound person who never shuts up. A slow gaffer. A writer who demands producer credit. A host who keeps growing out his sideburns even though it's the current year. A producer who turns your documentary into his own vanity project. Hypothetically speaking, these are all hypotheticals, most of which aren't even really deal breakers that'll keep you from getting to the finish line. And you should really be much more concerned with getting your product to the finish line than what some smartass with a YouTube channel may or may not say. So good luck, and thanks for watching.